Tell us about Hand of Fate.
Hand of Fate is an action RPG where you're a character who's, come to the ends of the earth to play the game of fate against the dealer at the table. And in that process, you earn new cards. The cards are turned over and they become sort of the dungeon layout that you explore through. And in that sense, it's like a roguelike game created filled with random encounters. But it's like a roguelike deck building game where you're actually building the deck that becomes those encounters. But it's like a roguelike deck building game with like God of War style combat where the cards that you've collected kind of fly onto your hero and your body and become swords and weapons and armor and special abilities and things that you can do. There are a number of kind of big boss enemies throughout who are the court cards, the Jack of Skeletons and the King of Orcs and so on and so forth. And through defeating those, you get new cards to add to your deck. And they can be simple cards like new encounters and new weapons and new abilities, or they can be more complex cards, like you can encounter the Pyromancer, who will upgrade every one of the basic swords in your deck to a flaming sword.
If we were going to add one more genre to this mix, what would you add?
City building, because that's insane, and and everything so far seems to have been like crazy genre mash. City building's about like everything else. You kind of like I can see how that fits in, but city building's nicely nuts. And one of the nice things about showing at PAX Oz was we got a chance to talk to a lot of people who are into board games and people who are into video games and people who are into like a deck building melange of action RPG, and are like, oh, that's awesome. That's exactly the sort of thing I like. Yeah. And that's, it's with anything. You take one Venn diagram and then you do another Venn diagram, and it's like the crossover of those 2 points is smaller but more passionate than the big market for either one. And I think that's what we've decided with this is, we'll go after those passionate people who are in the middle. Like it's a small part of the big market, but if you try and go for the big market, particularly as a small studio, you just kind of dilute down to nothing specific. Whereas in this case, we know who those people are, we know what sort of stuff they like, and we're making the game for them.
And so Hand of Fate is a game where there could be some pretty crazy emergent experiences coming out of it. Could you give an example of some of the crazy shenanigans that could happen?
So we've got a character, the Lich character that I talked about earlier. What the Lich does is the Lich sucks the life force out of other enemies around them in order to repop her health. So there's a couple of different ways to approach fighting a Lich, but you can just focus combat on the Lich and let her kill everybody else in the level if you like, and she'll drain them and keep fighting. Skeletons, on the other hand, who are kind of another enemy type, have a chance to regen when killed. So you get into these situations where if you're up against a Lich and a bunch of skeletons, through having kind of drawn a Lich card and drawn, say, a 4 of skeletons, then those skeletons keep getting, their souls sucked by the Lich to charge up, and then encounter, regen and come back again. So you've got to change up your strategies on that. There's a bunch of great combinations between gear. There's plenty of gear that does things like increases the range of all auras, and then you've got other stuff that lets you have damaging auras. So there's a lot of cards that are designed to be work in combination with other cards. What we consider kind of basic tactics in a lot of other games would be considered exploits.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the nice things about roguelikes.
Exactly.
Because of the transient nature of them, they can be totally goddamn broken.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. In fact, that's just funny.
That's exactly right. It's just broken on this run. Our big policy from like day one is not to treat this like an RPG in that, here's a sword, and here's a sword that does 2% more damage, and here's another sword that does 4% more damage, and so on and so forth. It's like, here's a sword that, makes people explode when you hit them. Here's a sword that can freeze time and let you move around freely. Everything's going to have like a big dramatic effect that then interplays with all the other stuff. And sure, that leads to some weird and wacky combos, but that's the fun. That's the joy of the thing. You can find out more about Hand of Fate by going to our website where there's a sign up for the beta. If you sign up there, you will get a free copy of the beta that we would love you to take a look at, hammer on in November-ish is where we're aiming for that at the moment, and we'll keep you up to date with all the updates and progress.